Hello and welcome back to this episode of the Peak Results Academy podcast. I'm your host, Rich Fournier. And in today's episode, I sit down with Jacqueline Pennington from Remax Hallmark First Group in Northumberland, which is located just on the north shore of Lake Ontario, just east of Toronto. Now, Jacqueline is the number one individual highest selling realtor in Northumberland, and that's based on 2019-2020 stats year to date. And she is ranked in the top 100 realtors with Remax in Canada. She's also been recognized by Remax as a top 35 under 35. This is a fantastic interview, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So stay tuned.
Have you ever wondered why some people thrive in all areas of their life? Welcome to the Peak Results Academy podcast with your host, Rich Fournier. Each week, we interview industry experts who consistently dominate in the fields of health, business, and beyond. Our mission is to share their personal struggles and strategies so that you can create your own peak results. Welcome to the Academy.
Hello, everyone. Rich Fournier here for the Peak Results Academy podcast. I'm your host, and in today's episode, I'm super excited to have Jacqueline Pennington from Remax Hallmark First Group in Northumberland. Thank you, Jacqueline, for being on this podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, for some of our international listeners who will have no idea where Northumberland is, maybe you can give us just a brief geography lesson.
Yes. So actually, unfortunately, most people have no idea where Northumberland is. So I like to say Northumberland is where the GTA ends. So contrary to popular belief, when you get past Oshawa, Bowmanville, the world does not end. It keeps going right through Northumberland County. So we're situated along the 401 corridor between Kingston and the GTA, so Toronto region.
So Toronto, Ontario. Perfect.
Yeah.
So, Jacqueline, you've had a pretty amazing career. I mean, you're working in a very small geographic area, not a ton of transactions in your area. And of course, you're aware this podcast is about trying to figure out what creates a peak result in someone's life, business, or whatever they're involved in. And you've had some pretty amazing results in the real estate business in a small community with a limited number of transactions, really climbing to the top level. And if you don't mind me bragging about you a little bit, I'd just love to share some of the results you've had if you're okay with that. Some of your most recent awards was the number one individual highest selling realtor in Northumberland based on 2019 and year-to-date 2020, which is extraordinary. Top 100 realtors in Canada with Remax, and on and on and on and on. And something that I was really excited to see, you actually spoke at the UN. So we'll get into that later. But you've had some extraordinary results, and my job is to figure out why. So maybe you can help us. Do you have like a little genie or a little bottle full of magic potion that allows you to perform at such a high level with 2 children and married?
I wish I did. Maybe it's espresso, but no, in terms of I certainly wish that I did, but no, there's no secret in that side of things. It's just honestly a lot of really hard work.
You know, I hear that hard work is an interesting thought process. And, as, working with some of my coaching clients and really chatting about what's hard work. And they say, well, I work really hard, Rich, and, but I'm not getting the results that I'm looking for. And I'm like, well, what is hard work actually mean? And so when you talk about hard work, what does that mean to you? And because you seem to be working either really a lot harder than everyone else, or your definition of hard work is different?
Yeah, I would say probably my definition is a little bit different. So probably contrary to popular belief, I don't actually work 24/7. So yes, I am very busy as a realtor, but my first priority is obviously my family and my kids. So I very rarely actually work evenings, even prior to COVID. I'm typically home by 5 o'clock every day. Maybe I might take an appointment after the kids are home, maybe once a week, if that. And I typically take at least one day off a weekend. So in terms of hard work, it's not necessarily, in terms of just focused on working constantly. Obviously, I put in a lot of hours in the day, but I think it's really about being streamlined, focused, and really having good systems in place so that I can be very effective in the hours that I do work and ensure that obviously my family and my children are still my top priority with time with them.
So I'm assuming when you get into the office, you're not surfing YouTube, listening to podcasts. being on Facebook, it sounds like you're very focused, and when you're in the office, you're there to work.
Yes. Well, actually, interesting enough, I am in my permanent office. So probably something that's a little bit different about me is I actually do not have a brokerage that I physically work out of. And I have not actually had a quote unquote desk base within a real estate brokerage probably for about 7 years. So I work out of my home. And that's one of the things in terms of, again, I don't want to work 10 hours a day. So I want to work really efficiently. And part of that for me is being in my zone, being in my office, and not having the distractions of a standard real estate brokerage around me. And certainly not to say anything negative about that. That's great for some people. I just find in terms of kind of, this is the environment that I'm most productive in.
It's amazing. Actually, just having a conversation with my wife this morning, and before the kids got up, it was around 6:30 this morning, having coffee and chatting about, our office space that I currently am in today and working from home. And I said, I would love to work from home, but the draw of playing with my three of the girls and the loud conversations, I don't know if I could do it. So I commend you for being able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start off a little bit, going back 15 plus years into your foray into the real estate business. You work in a small community, and you started, I think, around 23, 24?
Yeah, I was 23 when I started.
Me too. And you bought your first place, and you enjoyed it very much. And you talk about advocacy in your description to me, and that was an interesting word I hadn't seen used yet before in any of my conversation with other real estate agents. So what makes you so different?
I think in terms of I've always looked at the business in a very different way. And in terms of I think that's something you probably read in my bio, is that I've never looked at it as I'm a salesperson. I've always looked at it with an advocacy-based approach. I think what's a little bit different is that I came into real estate with a very different background. Contrary to popular belief, I actually wasn't in high school, although I probably looked like I just got out of it when I started. But I actually worked in human rights and children's advocacy. And that is something that was a passion of mine that I'd been involved in since a very young age. So when it came to the real estate business, I looked at it in terms of getting into it. In all honesty, I think like many people, I wanted to be self-employed, and I wanted really the feeling not to be limited in terms of where my success was. And I thought, I can add something different to this industry, because I didn't see a lot of people in the marketplace with this advocacy-based approach. Instead of being focused on the sales aspect and how many deals I do, how much money I make, I really looked at it and said, I think people really need an advocate. People really need someone in their corner who is knowledgeable, an expert in terms of what we're doing in this industry, and is going to be their advocate throughout the process. So I would say in terms of that's probably something that makes the way I look at business a little bit different than most.
That's great to hear. Now, there's a lot of people in our industry who get into the industry thinking that, it's an easy way to riches, an easy way to lots of money. And they love real estate. How does someone go from where you were at to becoming the number one selling, hate the word selling, but the number one real estate focused person in your area? Because when I look at the number of agents that are in the business today and competing for business, which really, I think there's an average of 2 deals per agent in Ontario that is available to transact on. What is that 1 or 2 or 3 things that have enabled you to get to that level?
So I think a few things. I would say one thing in terms of again, in terms of the way that I look at it, is I actually entered the business with a business plan. So again, I was 23 years old, and I walked into the RE/MAX office that I worked at with a SWOT analysis and a business plan in hand. And I think in terms of the broker I used to work for, probably almost fell off its chair. But I always had that idea in mind that this is a business. I'm an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of people enter this business and look at it from that sales perspective, in terms of a lot of the coaching and everything within our industry is based on how many people you need to call a day, how many people you need to get in front of, how many deals do you need to do. And I really didn't look at it like that. I really looked at it in terms of I need to lay a foundation for a successful business. And if I do all of those things and I do them well and continuously improve upon that, then the sales will come. So I think in terms of first and foremost is that I do think of it as I am an entrepreneur. I am a business person. I think in terms of kind of the other way is I'm not sales focused. I'm not dollar focused. And I always say if you're getting into the industry and what's driving you is money, you may succeed in the short term, but you're not going to last. That's not enough to keep you going. And people see that. Consumers can see that. So I've always been very, very focused on client approach in terms of if I do my job, if I do well by them, if every single person who works with me leaves feeling as though I brought something of value to the table for them, then again, they'll recommend me to their friends, etc., and go from there. And then the third thing in terms of kind of, again, I was young. I was 23. I didn't start on a team. I actually didn't know a single soul in the industry. And I also didn't really know anyone within my community. So I wasn't actually working at that point in time within the community, young. So none of my friends were buying homes. So I didn't have that sphere of influence. So I really had to focus very strongly on both prospecting as well as really building, that sphere in terms of kind of that support group and people around me to support myself and my business. So I think those are probably the three key things for me that have led me to where I am today.
Something that stands out for me, we were talking about doing good by other people. We call that the impression of increase. Where everyone that we're with, we leave them with the impression of increase, meaning we want to leave them better for having just have met us. And if you do that, you can't help but create a gap that has to be filled by something good. Because the universe, God, whoever you want to call it, abhors a gap. It needs to fill something. So when you serve to that capacity, you can't help but be rewarded in a certain way. When you talk about building a foundation in the beginning, what does that mean? Like, does that mean like creating a brand presence locally?
Yeah. So in terms of kind of, I've always actually been very much into branding. So I was actually, I would have been the first realtor in my entire community that actually had a logo. It was a horrible one. It was, my name with a house on top, really kind of old school. But again, at that point in time, I was the only one apparently to be even thought of, I need to personally a brand to be. Jacqueline Pennington is a brand. So I've always been very brand focused, but it's not just about logos and in terms of what color you use. It's who you are and how you interact. In terms of, again, being younger, you would never see me in jeans. I always dressed in terms of kind of very professionally. And then the other key component in terms of kind of, again, creating that brand and that, really that basis was the business community. So I got involved in starting a young professional organization in my community. I've been very active over the years with the Chamber of Commerce's in my area, as well as the nonprofit organizations. So again, I really had to build that base of in terms of kind of, cementing myself as a name in the community. I didn't have a history of a family growing up there in which people knew me. So I had to really create that from scratch.
I understand that when we moved up to the Barrie area, we didn't know a soul. And, when we started 3 kids and no one, I'm back in the game of real estate from Oakville area, Burlington area. All of a sudden I'm like, how do I start? Now, thank God I had the internet because there was no way that I could have scaled as quickly as we did without the internet, without having a circle of influence. I didn't have time to go knock on doors and shake hands and kiss babies and do that because I needed to go now. And so then I'm thinking about you and not having Google pay-per-click advertising, Facebook ads, etc., to develop a digital virtual relationship with someone in the back end, right? I can't even imagine the amount of work that you put in to create that brand. Like, that must have been a lot of work.
Yeah, and certainly in terms of kind of the early days, it absolutely was. There was a lot of, and I think that's our industry in general. You have to put a lot of work in the beginning, and it's a long payoff. And I think in terms of, we're always looking in our industry for that instant, lead in terms of kind of, I invest this amount, I do this activity, I need to get this, client as a result. And it's definitely a long-term game. So in the beginning, I would actually do 4 open houses a weekend. So I would do an open house from, 11 to 1 and then go to another one from, 2 to 4 every Saturday and Sunday. And it was really for me just about in terms of, I didn't have a huge pot of money to pull from to do farming. I'm big into farming now, but at that point in time, that's obviously an expensive, prospecting avenue. So really all I had was time. And so I took that time and I just made sure, you know, if there was an opening of an envelope, I was probably there. And that was really just what I was focused on in terms of how to get myself in front of people in the community.
I mean, we can go to the nuances of the business, you know, the strategy of creating relationships. But you can pick up any book. This isn't rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
This is about how many people did I communicate today about buying and selling a piece of property in an amazing way, and how do I, you know, create that sort of relationship that they're willing to communicate with me, their particulars, so I can communicate with them over the long term.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. Like, this is not anything bigger than that. Now, the mechanism or means behind that has changed, right? There's more ways to do that. But there's a psychology behind you as a young person, let's be honest, doing 2 open houses on the week, Saturday and Sunday, and starting groups and being part of that. There's a drive that is uncommon. That's not common. And what I'm curious on is I believe 80 to 90% of everything we do is psychology and mind-based. It has nothing to do with nuances of the business. So if you're open to it, I'd love to find out a little bit more about you and your background and your mind space, your mind share. How did that develop? Was your family motivated like you?
So in the sense of, I would say in terms of kind of, I came from truthfully pretty humble beginnings in that sense of things. None of my parents are actually in business of any kind. But what I do find interesting, I have 2 older sisters, and both of which in their individual fields are very similar to me in that they're very, very successful women in their businesses. My one sister runs a large company in Toronto, and the other one is an executive in government. So I'm not sure entirely how we all got there, but we definitely do have that, you know, ingrained with us in terms of kind of, you know, your success is what you make it. And, you know, kind of growing again from more humble beginnings, nothing was given to us. We had to work for it. So I've worked from a very young age, and that's in terms of kind of, I think, where a lot of that came from.
Yeah, I mean, there's the ability to be in this business day after day, week after week, month after month, without creating an income initially is not for the faint of heart. And people in your position, or some of the agents that professionals who I communicate with, make it look easy. And so I'm trying to understand what gave you that drive to enter a space where you could have been out traveling the world, you could have been out with other friends and living that lifestyle. Like, what was that internal drive, and where did that come from to perform at a level? I mean, there's one thing about being in a position where you're getting a paycheck and working really hard, but the expectations are there to work hard. And and the fear of loss sets in, and I'm like, well, I got to work really hard or else I'm going to lose this check.
Mm-hmm.
Here, you're not getting a check. Like, there's a huge disconnect for me. And how does someone develop that drive? Because if I could bottle it,
yep.
Right.
And I'd love to tell you in terms of kind of, here's the secret formula for it. In terms of kind of my own experience, I think truthfully, a lot of it probably came from the work I did in advocacy. So that was all volunteer driven. And I was young when I started. So it's probably around 13, 14. So here you have this young kid from Wooler, Ontario, you know, middle of nowhere. And I was, you know, running around at national and Canadian tables advocating for the rights of children. And there wasn't ever anything in it for me. It wasn't a job. So in terms of kind of, you know, the way that I look at it is that that's where my drive really started. I had to succeed because children's rights and my peers' well-being were on the line. So there really was no option to fail, if that makes sense. And I think in terms of kind of, for me, having been exposed to that from a very young age, really just probably laid that foundation of that. It doesn't matter what I do. I always have that ingrained in me that, you know, failure is unfortunately just not an option.
We have a program called Mission and Commission, where you talk about you have to be on a mission for something greater than yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you're, and I don't like the word commission, but it works publicly. When you're advocating for these kids, was there something that happened in your life where you looked and something happened in your circle of influence that you were drawn to be a stand for other people when they couldn't be a stand for themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it happened in high school. In terms of at that point in time in high school and where I kind of got involved, we had, the segregated classroom still. That's where it all kind of began in terms of children with intellectual disabilities had to be in a different classroom. And I saw a lot of bullying happening, and I kind of looked at it again, not having too much in terms of growing up in life, and said, I think I've got it bad, but look at what these other kids are dealing with every day. And I started to connect with them. I started to learn more about them. And that's in terms of kind of knowing their stories and the struggles and the challenges these young people were facing, is really where that kind of connection came to, in terms of that, I have a voice that I can use to help empower them. And I have a voice I myself can use to make sure that they have equality and a better life.
And it sounds, which is extremely admirable. And then now it sounds like you've taken that same passion and were able to collapse the same ideology into servicing people in the real estate world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a double-edged sword. My husband teases me for all the time to say, you got to settle advocacy Jackie down a little bit right now. Cause that's just me. That's how I'm ingrained, in terms of if I ever see anyone at any point in time, that isn't being respected, isn't equal, or being discriminated against, it's really hard for me to kind of keep my mouth shut around it. So yeah, that's in terms of, as I said, it's a great characteristic I have, but at the same point in time, it can sometimes get me in a bit of trouble, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier, and this is why I love this style of conversation. It's, I'm not ramming off a list of questions, because you mentioned something earlier about being on purpose for what you do, and it can't be about the money.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be about the money for a bit. But I completely resonated with you when you said it can't be for a long time. You won't last. Mm-hmm. Because you will burn out. Because money is nothing. Money, all it is it's a concept.
Yeah.
And somebody can perform for a period of time, but unless they tie something bigger to that outcome, whether it's serving their family, making sure their family's okay, or making sure they're an advocate for other people in the real estate business. I tried to look at it, and when I came up here, that I was here to save those people from other people. Mm-hmm. Right? That there were other people who were going to give them bad advice, bad service. And I had to play in my mind, because it was very daunting to start in a brand new market, at 40. Mm-hmm. Where I didn't know anyone. I had to play with my mind. And do you still feel like you have to play with your mind every day to perform at a high level after all this time?
Yes and no. I would say in terms of and again, I think that's where we go back to money can't be the focus. Right. Because you're always going to have good years. You're always going to have bad years. And in terms of if you're just focused on that next sales award level, it's not going to be what keeps you going in the morning. In terms of for me, I think, again, it can be daunting. And I think you've said it really well. When we hear about some of our clients' experiences with other, call it professionals in our industry. And that's, I think, where I struggle in terms of I hear those stories, and I really just want to help people. I want to have people feel as though, realtors are not sleazy, that we are a professional industry, and walk away feeling as though they had a really good experience throughout that, and that they felt protected, and they felt that somebody was in their corner for them all along the way.
What I've experienced so far through this podcast and working with, mainly in talking with people in our profession, and now we've gone into other areas, because other areas had great peak results as well. But I found that the people that in our who are performing at a very high level for a very consistent amount of time really do care. Mm-hmm. They really do, right?
They really do.
Minus the flash and the game of marketing, which is just to get the attention, which is you have to in this business. I think that they really do care. They really are genuinely there to serve. And I think that that's the message that I'm trying to bring out, is that to create anything that's extraordinary, you must be in love with what you do every day, not the outcome, but the process. The process has to be the magic.
Yeah,
It's not,
absolutely.
you don't enjoy the process day to day. It's impossible to do it every day for a long period of time.
And I think that's honestly something that would surprise a lot of people to know is that, I think in every community, when we start in the industry or in general, there's always that talk about, those big producing agents. And in terms of, to be honest, a lot of it's not very flattering in terms of you always hear people in the community saying this, that, or the other. And what surprises me is that the more that in terms of kind of through either RE/MAX conferences, Hallmark in general, that I talk to and I'm exposed to, those real estate giants we've all looked up to, they are genuinely the nicest, most caring, amazing human beings you will ever meet. And I think that's the thing in terms of a lot of people don't realize that, it's not as cutthroat of an industry as I think people think it is. They didn't get to the top by stepping on other people. They got to the top because they are really just genuinely good people who care about their clients, and their clients can see that. And obviously that's what they're attracting in terms of kind of why they're successful.
Yeah, I agree. When you look at some of the nuances, and the reason why I'll bring this up is I think the magic of performance is in our mind. I mean, I had this great, amazing interview the last 2 days with a married couple who are both Olympians, Canadian Olympians, who performed at a very high level. And I'm really excited to bring out that podcast for the next couple of weeks. There's the mind, which is all important, the most important thing in performance. But some of our listeners want to know about the daily method of operation on a day-to-day. So if you're open to it, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis to serve your clients pre-COVID, and if that's going to change post-COVID.
So in terms of kind of what a typical day looks like?
Yeah, your day-to-day method of operation.
Yeah. So in terms of for me, I'm very system-based approach. So in terms of kind of, I have a full-time staff that works with me that takes care of a lot of the back end. And the reasoning for that is that I'm a people person. I want to be with my clients. I want to be talking to my clients. So whether or not that's in person or whether or not that's in terms of kind of, right now virtually. And in terms of kind of to talk a little bit about, that communication piece, I think is key. I just met actually with an individual the other day, and they said, they had their home listed, COVID happened, and it was crickets from their realtor. And they never heard from their realtor within the last 2 months. And I think in terms of kind of that's where my focus is always on, even if I don't actually have anything to report to that person, they still want to hear from us. Because even if we're not in the midst of a pandemic as we are now, when it comes to someone either purchasing or selling their home, during that period of time, that process really just becomes everything to them. They wake up in the morning, they're thinking about it. They go to sleep at night, they're thinking about it. It is such an important thing to an individual. So the way that I've always looked at it and kind of based my business is that it has to be like that for me too. That I know when they wake up, that's what they're thinking. I know 5 minutes after that showing concluded, they're wondering what happened. Did they like the house? Did they not like the house? So I always try to really think about that in that mindset and just make sure that I'm so on top of communicating with clients. So in terms of kind of with my day, a lot of it is spent either on the phone, email, texting, just communicating and talking to my clients. And again, especially right now with obviously what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Do you set limits in terms of when you communicate? Like, will you take text, phone calls past a certain time in the evening? When you take your day off, is it a full day off, or are you saying you take a day off, but you're running to the bathroom, texting and emailing and calling?
I am always accessible, just to be honest, in terms of kind of, with the exception of when I'm sleeping. I will take calls up until the end of the day, texting, things to that extent. So again, and I know some realtors have that in terms of, this is my day off. I don't want to hear from you. But the way that I look at it is that they don't get to take a day off from that process. Their house is still on the market or they're still looking to buy. So my cell phone is at my hip. I am very accessible to clients. Now there's times in terms of kind of, my philosophy is that I should be responding within a very short period of time. And that's what my clients have come to expect of me. As my husband puts it, I run a very high touch business model. And that's certainly been something that's been a challenge for me as I've grown busier. How do I continue to have that model and be authentic to who I've always been? And that's that very high touch model with just a greater, in terms of kind of number of clients that I'm dealing with. So no, I'm actually one of those realtors who I am pretty much easily accessible, with the exception of obviously when I take time off for my family.
Of course, of course. And I just want to make sure that I think, some people that I communicate with, it's, I'm off Thursday. I don't come back till Sunday. I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's get down into the granular aspects of it. This is a high touch industry, and the consumer absolutely expects instant communication.
Absolutely.
When you look at the future of our industry, and do you see the next generation of technology replacing us or augmenting what we do?
I think in terms of kind of the next, technology is always going to be a really key component. And I think especially right now, we're realizing in terms of, it's going to be the difference over who makes it out of the pandemic in terms of still being in this business is successful and who doesn't. I was an early adopter of DocuSign. I needed to be. At the time that DocuSign came out, I was probably about 6 or 7 months pregnant. So I needed to be able to utilize that tool. And those types of technologies have really served me well in our current environment. But absolutely, I do not think under any way, shape, or form it's going to be a replacement for us. We do so much for clients. We know that. I know people like to think in terms of, you just put a for sale sign in the yard and, throw it on the MLS. But we all know there's so much more to what we add to our industry. I like to say in terms of kind of I'm 80% counselor and maybe 20% sales representative. So there is that really big key component in terms of supporting clients from the, really emotional and mental health side of things throughout the transaction.
I agree with you completely. I mean, we had a run for 10 years, which was absolutely amazing, but, we're in that, that bias where what is currently happening will always happen. And that's not true. And that's especially true now with COVID. So, I do believe that fear, ego, and greed will, they need us, and they need people like you who are an advocate for them, because, in that sales representative title that Rico has, horrible. They need to change it, because that is not what we do. I cannot sell a piece of property ever. You can't. It's either you like it or you don't.
Yeah. And I have heard that they actually are in process of looking at that. And actually, interestingly enough, so I am a broker, and I got my broker's license when I was 25. So the day, in terms of we have to be in the business for 2 years to get it, I did all my courses in advance and actually registered as a broker on my 2-year anniversary, because I hated the term sales representative. Hated it. And I wanted to make it clear, I am not a sales representative. I am your advocate. And that's why one of the reasons I changed it to broker as quickly as I possibly could.
What's really super interesting is that I listen to you. You're very, my feelings that when you make a decision, you make a decision. You cut off. You draw a line in the sand. This is what it is. And because of that, everything moves, right? You're not like, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't do it. Not sure. And I think that's a common, it's a common feature, for lack of a better word, for anyone who's performing at a high level. They make a decision very quickly, and that is it. That's done. I'm not going back on that decision. And I just wanted to point that out. That's an observation, and it's really great to see. When you look, on our phone call the other day, we were chatting about how you decided to adopt servicing your sellers to the best of your ability by working with non-Northumberland agents. You made a decision to do whatever you possibly could to work with agents who were outside your service area. And how much of a difference maker was that in the success of your business?
That was huge, to be honest, in terms of kind of when I look back in terms of what did I do differently. And I'd say that was one of the main things. So as we talked about, I joined a Toronto-based brokerage quite a few years ago. And in our particular market, again, we're kind of on the outskirts of the city. So a lot of buyers come to our area. The driving, market for our particular area is buyers from the GTA, as well as coming with their agents. And unfortunately, in kind of small town real estate, there is a bit of this sandbox mentality that we don't want you playing in our sandbox. And that was very evident to me. It certainly wasn't something that's hidden. It is very well known in our community, and I think to the east. And again, in terms of, I've always been that advocacy client-based approach. I looked at it and said, what do I care? What do I care if, Susan down the street sells the listing versus, John from the city? At the end of the day, as long as my client gets the most money possible, that's what the priority is. So I really pivoted my business to be focused on attracting both the GTA clientele, but also the agents. So in terms of kind of along with the way that I list my properties, again, it's not just about sales marketing, it's really about education, because we're dealing with consumers that typically speaking have never lived in our market, and often, usually they've maybe been here once or twice, realtors that don't deal with septic wells, etc. So there's a really big support and education piece that goes along with what I do when dealing with realtors from outside of our community.
That's fantastic to hear. If you could give a piece of advice to someone who's starting today, it's different. It's different, even 10 years ago to where we are today in terms of growing a real estate business today. Is there something that you could do differently today than what you did, 15 years ago? I stacked a couple questions inside of that, so I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. In terms of kind of differently today, obviously the tools that are out there are somewhat different than what I had accessible to me at the time. One of the things in terms of kind of a piece of advice to newer agents, education is so key in this industry. And again, if I could kind of look back at one of those things where I say, I did that right. I got very actively engaged in anything and everything in terms of course that I could take, I took it. And that's what really allowed me to kind of cement myself and push my career forward. Because again, I was young, and when I went into the listing presentation, because I didn't have any sort of sphere of influence, I was going in cold. I never knew these people, and I was typically the underdog at the table competing against the big guys. So I needed to really know what I was talking about. It also didn't help that I looked like I was a teenager. So I would say that's a really important thing in terms of if you want somebody to trust you with their largest investment and pay you thousands of dollars, you better show up to the table and know your shit. And I don't think enough people in our industry do. I'm shocked in terms of kind of the lack of knowledge that continuously I see within the real estate community. So I think that would be one really main thing, especially if, in those early days, you're not typically as busy with clients. So you have the time to be doing the courses. So don't wait until you're almost at your re-registration period to complete your courses. Do them right away. And in terms of kind of, again, other things in terms of advice or, if you're starting in the industry, partner up with senior agents, support them so that they can then support and mentor you as well. And be very just open to learning in general.
I think so as well. I think partnering with someone is extremely important, somebody who's been around. Would you advise someone to join a team today or to start off on their own?
In terms of, to be honest, and again, I didn't start with a team. There wasn't really many teams within my market at that point in time. I think starting with a team is a good idea in some ways, but unfortunately, the challenge with it is that you also need to learn who you are, and you need to be really on your own in some ways to kind of, you can't rely on anybody else in this business. You have to get the business yourself. So I think sometimes the only potential downside of a team is that it's a great place to learn, but you also don't want to become complacent or just dependent on that team. You really want to figure out your style and who you are. So I think there is good, positives to either joining the team or, again, find an agent within the office that's successful that might have additional leads or time to kind of support you. But again, you have to bring something to them. The reason I was doing 2 open houses a day every Saturday and Sunday was to support the senior agents in my office so that when they had leads, they knew who scratched their back and who to give them to.
It makes a lot of sense. Today, are you primarily a listing agent?
Yes. So about 75% of my business is sale, like listing sides of things.
Yeah. And when you look at, because I think the only way to have a life in this business is to be a listing agent.
Absolutely.
And that's 100%. Like no one can convince me otherwise.
Yeah. And for me, that was a strategic decision when I had children. So in terms of right before I had my first child, I sat down and said, how am I going to do this and still see my kids every day? And I didn't want to be running the road. So I made a specific decision in terms of I was going to be really focused on the listing side of things, and really formed my business around going after that market to cement myself as a listing realtor.
Do you, just a few more minutes, and I know, thank you for taking the time. When
Yeah, of course.
generating your listings today, you've been around for a bit long, so it's a little bit easier, but at the same time, competition has gone up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, I don't think it's easier, but I think competition has gone up. And so is there a strategy that you utilize on a daily basis to acquire new clients and new listings?
Yes, so actually I'm big into farming still. So I've had a geographical farm area for almost 10 years now, and I still farm. So one of the oldest school techniques in the industry, and I still use that quite a bit. So farming, and then in terms of kind of, again, if you're looking to go more after the listing side, you have to have a really, really strong listing package that's really technology based in terms of innovative and cutting edge marketing.
I agree with that very much. When you look at, you don't have to give numbers, but I'm super curious. As a percentage of, say, 100 household, how many, and say 100 households was the entire community, how many households would you, as a percentage, farm in that community? So if you had, 10,000 people, 10,000, is it 10% of a community? Is it 20% of a community? Is it 30% of a community? Are you farming? Is it?
So I have kind of a two-phase farm approach. So I have a hard, solid farm area of about 10,000 homes.
Yep.
And then I do have other ones on top of that. So in terms of kind of the 20,000 or so homes in the area, I probably actually farm about 50% to 60.
Wow. That's
so it's aggressive.
Well, it's good. I think it's great. Right. Thank you for sharing that. I'm super curious. I think, looking at our community where we are today and what's possible, is there, do you ramp that up during the year, or is it bi-weekly, is it monthly, just trying to understand that process?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and actually I do a lot on the farming. Actually, I've done seminars on it as well. So I could talk to you all day about farming. I do ramp it up at certain periods of time during the year, but the one common mistake I see people make with farming is that they ramp it up in the spring. I'm actually really aggressively farming in December, January, February.
It makes a ton of sense. Very logical.
Yeah, because that's when people are starting to kind of think. So I always kind of get a chuckle when you start to see realtors putting out other postcards in, April, May. I've already been in their door. I've already secured that listing long before most people are even thinking about starting to put a piece of mail out. Yeah.
No, I agree. And that's, I think some people, they'll start off really big, right? And then they're not consistent. And I've heard the numbers,
Yeah.
Like 18 months before you start getting that return.
Yeah, probably at least that. And again, in terms of, I have a huge farm now, but I didn't start with that, obviously. You know what, you want to start with a micro, anything kind of like 1,000, and just be hitting that very regularly, as opposed to doing, one large flyer, output, once a year or twice a year.
Makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. If there's anything that you can share with our listeners today, any piece of advice in terms of what does it take and who do you have to be inside to create that high level of performance in this industry? If you could share that with us, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate that.
So one key thing I've always gone back to is Kaizen, which is the Japanese word for improvement, and that mindset of you have to be in the mindset of continuous self-improvement. Doesn't matter if you've been in the industry for 5 years or 40 years. When you look at those top producing long-term agents that are still succeeding, it's because they're continuously improving and adapting and evolving their business.
That's Tony Robbins one of his primary things 25 years ago was that ideology, constant improvement every single day. And that's an amazing message. And I appreciate you very much. Thank you for spending some time with us. And I genuinely believe that by you sharing how you've had the success that you had, things will work out in an amazing way for you. And I know our audience does appreciate this. So thank you very, very much.
Well, and thank you. And thank you for doing this. I think it's a great initiative to be getting more information out there and helping, the real estate community in general.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Have yourself an amazing day and try to have some fun.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you've heard and you're interested in seeing if you are fit to work with Peak Results Academy, here's what I want you to do next. Head over to peakresultsacademy.com/call. That's peakresultsacademy.com/call and book an appointment to speak with our team. We'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes and get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, what do you really want out of life and your business? Number 2, what is not working for you today? And number 3, the exact strategy you should be using to create massive change in these areas. Remember, changing your life and creating massive results does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen. We're helping clients all over the world create peak results in their health, in their businesses, and in their personal lives. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to peakresultsacademy.com/call. We'll chat soon.